My name is Ryan, and what I'm about to tell you happened 5 years ago during a cross-country move from Texas to California. I was driving a heavy U-Haul truck, pulling my small car behind it, and I was exhausted. I was somewhere deep in Arizona, miles off the main interstate, trying to save time by taking the old, rarely used Route 93. It was late, maybe 11 p.m. The desert air was cold and dry, and the darkness outside the truck windows was thick and complete. After hours of driving past nothing but saguaro cacti and sand, I was desperate for a place to stop. But every roadside motel I passed looked either shut down or too sketchy to risk my entire life's possessions. Finally, I saw it. A faded, buzzing neon sign that read Saguaro Motel. It looked like it hadn't seen a guest in decades. The parking lot was cracked and dust had claimed the asphalt. Only one light was on, a dim orange glow in the manager's office. Against me better judgment, I pulled the enormous rig into the lot. The silence that fell after I killed the engine was profound. It felt like the desert was holding its breath. The building was a long, single-story block with maybe 20 rooms, all dark except for the single light. It was creepy, but I told myself I was too tired to care. The elderly manager, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, didn't ask for ID or credit card. He just gave me a rusty key for room 14 and muttered, "Pay cash in the morning." Room 14 was at the very end of the building, the farthest from the office. As I unlocked the door and pushed it open, I was hit by a heavy, cloying smell, a mixture of mildew, stale cigarette smoke, and something else, something vaguely sweet and metallic. Like dried blood mixed with cheap perfume, the room was sparsely furnished. One bed, a chair, and a single, grime-covered window overlooking a high, rusted chain-link fence. Before unpacking anything, I went to look out the window. The chain-link fence was tall, maybe 8 feet high, and seemed to surround the entire motel property. Beyond the fence was just black, featureless desert. But as I scanned the fence line with my phone's weak flashlight, I saw something disturbing. Several patches of the wire mesh were neatly cut and peeled back near the ground, just large enough for a person to crawl through. They hadn't been fixed. Someone had been using them, and as I watched, the thin metal wires began to gently sway in the non-existent wind. I quickly shut the flimsy curtain and turned my attention to the large mirrored wall unit across from the bed. As I walked towards it, I caught my own reflection, and for a half second, I saw another figure standing directly behind me in the reflection. It was tall, impossibly thin, wearing dark clothes, and its head was tilted. I spun around immediately. Nothing. The room was empty. But when I looked back at the mirror, my own reflection looked strangely flat and static. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the brief glimpse I saw was something that was always there, just usually hidden by my own image. I decided to call the police, even if it was just to report the cut fence. I grabbed the old corded phone beside the bed. As I lifted the receiver, I saw that the phone's coil cord was completely severed near the wall jack, neatly cut with a sharp object. It hadn't been unplugged, it had been disabled. I realized my cell phone was still in the truck. I was completely cut off, and the silence from the surrounding empty rooms felt like it was pressing in on me, waiting for me to make the next mistake. I moved back to the curtained window, not to look out, but to check the lock. It was a flimsy latch. Suddenly, I heard a very faint, almost impossible sound from above the ceiling. It sounded like fine grains of sand or dirt shifting just above the drywall. The sound traveled slowly, moving from the center of the room across the ceiling and stopping directly over my head. My heart hammered. Was this motel building so old that animals lived in the ceiling? Or was something heavy crawling in the space between the roof and the ceiling tiles? Something that knew exactly where I was standing. I slowly backed away from the window and ceiling. My focus was now solely on the wooden door. I locked the deadbolt and pushed the metal safety latch closed. As I did this, the bright light from the hallway outside the room suddenly flickered on, casting a sharp, elongated shadow of the door latch onto the carpet. But the shadow was distorted. The latch's shadow was slightly crooked, and as I watched, the distortion seemed to move. As if the light source outside was breathing, something was standing directly outside my door, blocking the light source just enough to distort the shadow. I needed a place to hide. The room was small, but it had one closet near the bathroom. I slid inside, pulling the folding door closed, leaving just a tiny gap near the hinges. The closet smelled intensely of cedar and mothballs. I held my breath, listening to the heavy silence. After a minute, I heard the faint sniffing sound from the ceiling directly above the closet, followed by the sound of the dirt shifting again. The observer had tracked me to the closet and was now waiting directly above me. I realized the ceiling wasn't the only threat. The dust on the floor near the bottom of the closet door started to move. Slowly, deliberately, a patch of dry dirt and grit was being pulled under the door, as if something outside was testing the gap. I could hear a very faint, dry scratching sound accompanying the dirt's movement. It was trying to get under the door and into the closet. The fear was no longer about being seen. It was about being touched. I made the mistake of looking through the tiny gap in the folding door hinge again. What I saw wasn't near the door, but across the room, near the bathroom. The reflection in the large wall mirror was clear, and the tall, thin, dark figure was now standing in the middle of the room. It was looking directly at the closet, and its head was tilted so far over its shoulder that its chin rested almost on its collarbone. It wasn't moving. It was just acknowledging that it knew exactly where I was and was giving me a moment of pure frozen terror before the next phase began. The sound came from the exterior door. Click, the deadbolt retracted. The safety latch sprang open. The rustle of the latch was deafening in the silence. The entity hadn't broken the lock or forced the door. It had used the key. It was the manager or someone with access. The door slowly began to open, revealing only the dim, sickly orange light of the hallway. No footsteps were heard, only the sound of the doorframe groaning under the slow, immense weight pressing against it. With the door open, I knew the closet was no defense. The smell of mildew and blood was suddenly much stronger. I burst out of the closet, grabbed the heavy wooden chair, and slammed it as hard as I could into the grime-covered window. The glass shattered, the sound deafening the silent motel. I ripped the curtain away and clawed at the rusted chain-link fence, ignoring the pain as the wires cut my hands. I squeezed through the cut in the fence, stumbling out into the open. Black desert. I didn't stop to look back at the gaping window. I ran toward me U-Haul, fumbling for the keys. Just as I reached the driver's side door, I glanced over at the manager's office. The door was slightly ajar, and the elderly manager was standing there, silhouetted against the dim orange light. He wasn't scared or surprised by the shattering glass. He was simply smiling, a wide, vacant, terrible smile. And he gave me a slow, deliberate wave goodbye, as if he knew I was never truly leaving the Saguaro Motel story. I jumped into the U-Haul, started the engine immediately, and roared out of the parking lot, ripping the hitch for my car right off the truck's frame in my panic. I didn't care. I drove until dawn. I reported the incident days later, but the police found no motel named Saguaro on Route 93. Only abandoned asphalt and desert. Today, I still travel for work, but I never stop at any motel, especially if only one light is on. I know that the person or thing that smiled in the mirror is still back there waiting in room 14 for someone new to pull off the road and complete the story I left unfinished.